On our wedding night, my husband said tiredly, "Sorry, I can't. I'm too exhausted." And we went to sleep in separate rooms. But as I was falling asleep, right at midnight, from my husband's room upstairs, I heard strange moans. Those sounds, guttural and almost inhuman, froze the blood in my veins. I lay there, my wedding dress still draped over the nearby chair, wondering what I'd gotten myself into. Calloway and I had dated for nearly 18 months before he proposed, yet somehow, in that moment, I realized how little I truly knew about the man I'd just pledged my life to. I slipped from beneath the silk sheets, my bare feet silent against the polished hardwood floor of the Tremaine family's ancestral home, the home that was now supposedly mine as well. The moaning continued, punctuated by what sounded like whispered words in a language I couldn't identify. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob, hesitating at the threshold of our marital bedroom. We'd barely been married 12 hours, and already the foundations were cracking beneath my feet. Calloway had been so insistent on separate rooms for our first night. "It's tradition in the Tremaine family," he'd explained earlier that evening, his gray eyes avoiding mine as he spoke. "Just for the first night, Ilara, I promise." When I'd protested, his mother, Marianne, had appeared as if conjured, her thin lips pressed into what passed for a smile. "All Tremaine brides respect this tradition," she'd said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "You'll understand tomorrow." But as those moans echoed through the old house's vents, understanding seemed further away than ever. I crept into the hallway, the runner carpet muffling my steps as I moved toward the grand staircase. The Tremaine estate was a maze of corridors and hidden passages built in the late 1800s by Calloway's great-great-grandfather, a railroad tycoon whose portrait still dominated the main hall, his eyes following visitors with unsettling intensity. The moans grew louder as I approached Calloway's door, transforming into what sounded like words, or perhaps incantations. My heart hammered against my ribs as I pressed my ear to the heavy oak door. What I heard made no sense. Calloway speaking in multiple voices, one moment pleading, the next demanding, then dissolving into those inhuman moans that had first drawn me from my bed. "Calloway," I whispered, rapping my knuckles gently against the wood. The sound stopped instantly, leaving behind a silence so complete it seemed to have physical weight. I waited, counted my heartbeats. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, before trying again. "Calloway, are you all right?" The door opened so suddenly I nearly fell forward. Calloway stood before me, his wedding suit still immaculately in place despite the late hour, not a wrinkle to be seen. His face, however, bore no resemblance to the man I'd married that morning. Deep shadows pooled beneath his eyes, and his skin had a waxy, almost translucent quality in the hallway's dim light. "Ilara," he said, my name sounding foreign on his lips, "you should be asleep." "I heard noises," I replied, trying to peer past him into the room. "It sounded like you were in pain." He blocked my view smoothly, stepping into the hallway and pulling the door closed behind him. "Just a nightmare. The Tremaine men have vivid dreams on significant nights." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Go back to bed, darling. We have a big day tomorrow. Mother has planned a formal breakfast to welcome you to the family." As he spoke, I noticed something on his collar, a dark smudge that looked disturbingly like blood. "Calloway, you're bleeding." His hand flew to his neck, fingers coming away stained red. For a moment, Something like panic flashed across his features before his aristocratic composure reasserted itself. I must have scratched myself during the dream. It's nothing. Let me see, I insisted, reaching toward him. His hand caught my wrist with unexpected strength. I said it's nothing. His voice had hardened, and I suddenly felt very aware of how isolated we were in this massive house, how little my friends and family knew about the Tremaines beyond their wealth and status. Go back to bed, Alara, please. I retreated to my room, locking the door behind me, an instinctive action that immediately filled me with shame. This was my husband, the man I'd fallen in love with during those 18 blissful months of courtship, the man who'd swept me off my feet with his knowledge of obscure poetry, his passion for historical architecture, his gentle insistence that I was unlike anyone he'd ever met. Now, on our wedding night, I was locking my door against him. Sleep evaded me for the remainder of the night. I lay awake, listening for any sound from Calloway's room, but the house remained silent as a tomb. When morning light finally crept through the heavy brocade curtains, I rose and prepared myself for the formal breakfast, determined to maintain appearances while I sorted through my confusion. The Tremaine family dining room could comfortably seat 30 people, but that morning only 5 places were set at one end of the massive mahogany table. Mary Ann presided at the head, with Frederick, Calloway's father, to her right. Calloway sat at her left, leaving me to sit beside my new husband and across from Calloway's younger sister, Valencia, who had flown in from Europe specifically for the wedding. "Did you sleep well, dear?" Mary Ann asked as servants silently filled our crystal water glasses. Her tone suggested polite interest, but her eyes, the same stormy gray as Calloway's, watched me with unsettling intensity. "Like a log," I lied, noting how Calloway's shoulders relaxed slightly at my response. "The room is beautiful." "The blue room has always been reserved for new Tremaine brides," Frederick interjected, his deep voice rumbling through the cavernous space. "My mother slept there on her wedding night, as did Mary Ann." "And they all survived," Valencia added, with a cryptic smile that reminded me unnervingly of her brothers from the previous night. At 22, she was 3 years younger than Calloway and I, but there was something ancient in her eyes that belied her youth. "Valencia," Mary Ann warned softly, though no actual reprimand followed. The meal progressed with excruciating slowness, dominated by Mary Ann's monologues about Tremaine family history and Frederick's occasional grunts of agreement. Calloway remained largely silent, picking at his food without actually eating much. I noticed a small bandage at the base of his throat, concealing the mysterious wound from the night before. "Ilara will need to be measured for the portrait today," Mary Ann announced as dessert was served, some kind of traditional Tremaine family pudding that tasted faintly of lavender and something metallic I couldn't identify. "Portrait?" I asked, looking to Calloway for explanation. "Family tradition," he replied, his voice oddly flat. "All Tremaine brides are painted in their first year of marriage. The portraits hang in the East Gallery." "I haven't agreed to any portrait," I said, trying to keep my tone light, despite my growing discomfort. Frederick's spoon clattered against fine china. "It's not a matter of agreement, my dear. It's tradition." "Surely traditions can be discussed," I countered, feeling a flare of the independence that my mother had always warned would make marriage difficult for me. "I'm not particularly comfortable with formal portraits." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Marianne's smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened like granite. Perhaps you don't fully understand what it means to be a Tremaine. Perhaps I don't, I admitted, finding unexpected courage in acknowledging the truth. Everything happened rather quickly, didn't it? The engagement, the wedding. When one knows, Valencia interjected, though her tone suggested she was quoting someone else rather than expressing her own sentiment. The portrait will be done this afternoon, Marianne continued as if I hadn't spoken. The artist has already been commissioned. He's painting you in the gold dress. What gold dress? I asked, genuinely confused. My wedding gown had been ivory silk. All four Tremaines exchanged glances that sent a chill down my spine. The dress you'll wear in the portrait, Calloway explained finally, reaching for my hand under the table. His fingers were ice cold. It's been in the family for generations. Every Tremaine bride wears it for her portrait. Something in his eyes pleaded with me not to argue further, and despite my growing unease, I nodded my agreement. After all, it was just a portrait. I could humor my new in-laws in this small matter while I figured out what was really happening beneath the surface of this family. The gold dress, as it turned out, was far from a small matter. After breakfast, Marianne led me to what she called the preparation room, a space that might once have been a ladies' dressing chamber, but now resembled something between a museum and a medical examination room. Glass cases lined the walls, containing artifacts I couldn't immediately identify. An examination table stood in the center, draped with what looked like antique linen. The dress requires certain preparations, Marianne explained, gesturing toward the table. If you would. I'm sorry, I said, backing toward the door. What exactly are you asking me to do? Lie down, she replied, as if it were the most natural request in the world. We need to measure you properly. The dress must fit perfectly for the binding to take. The binding? To the family, she clarified, though her explanation only deepened my confusion. Every Tremaine bride undergoes the binding. It ensures loyalty. I laughed nervously. I think my marriage vows covered loyalty quite thoroughly. Marianne's expression didn't change. Vows can be broken. The binding cannot. Before I could respond, the door opened behind me and Calloway entered. He'd changed into what appeared to be formal attire from another century, a black suit with tails, a high collar, and a blood-red cravat that emphasized the pallor of his skin. Mother, he said, his voice carrying a warning. We agreed to ease Ilara into our ways. There's no time for ease, Marianne countered sharply. The alignment is tonight. If she's not prepared, the consequences will be managed, Calloway interrupted. He turned to me, his expression softening slightly. Ilara, I know this seems strange. I should have prepared you better. But I promise, everything we do is for the good of the family, our family, which now includes you. I don't understand any of this, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. What alignment? What binding? What were those sounds coming from your room last night? At the mention of the previous night, Frederick appeared in the doorway, his imposing frame blocking any chance of escape. She heard you? He said to Calloway, his tone accusatory. I told you, the silencing rituals needed to be stronger. Silencing rituals? I repeated, feeling as though I'd stumbled into some bizarre dream. What are you talking about? The three Tremaines exchanged glances again, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, Calloway approached me, taking my hands in his. "Elara, my love," he began, his voice gentle despite the tension in the room. "The Tremaine family has certain traditions that may seem unusual to outsiders, but they've kept our bloodline strong for centuries." "Bloodline," I echoed, the word hanging ominously in the air between us. "We are special, Elara," he continued. "Chosen, some might say. The alignment tonight is a celestial event that happens once every 33 years. It allows us to renew our family's covenant." "Covenant with what?" I asked, though some part of me wasn't sure I wanted the answer. Instead of responding directly, Calloway led me to one of the glass cases along the wall. Inside lay what appeared to be a journal, its leather binding cracked with age. "My great-great-great-grandfather's account of the first binding," he explained. "In 1847, during a similar alignment, he discovered certain entities that offered power, longevity, and influence in exchange for devotion." I stared at him, waiting for some indication that this was an elaborate joke, a strange hazing ritual for new family members, but Calloway's expression remained earnest, almost pleading. "You're saying your family made some sort of pact with entities?" I struggled to make sense of his words. "A covenant," Marianne corrected from behind me, "a sacred arrangement that has brought the Tremaines prosperity for generations, and tonight you will help us renew it." "I most certainly will not," I replied, pulling my hands from Calloway's grip. "This is insane. All of you are insane." Frederick stepped further into the room. "Whether you participate willingly or not is irrelevant. You married into this family. You are bound by blood and law." "Actually," I countered, summoning all my courage, "I'm not bound by anything except a marriage certificate, which can be annulled." I turned to Calloway, searching his face for any sign of the man I thought I'd married. "I want to leave. Now." For a moment, something like pain flashed across his features. "Elara, please, if you would just listen." "I've heard enough," I interrupted. "I'm going to pack my things, and then I'm calling a car. This marriage is over before it's even begun." I pushed past Frederick, half expecting him to physically restrain me, but he merely watched as I hurried down the corridor toward the blue room. My hands shook as I pulled my suitcase from the closet, throwing in clothes haphazardly. Tears blurred my vision, not for the loss of the marriage, which now seemed like a narrow escape, but for the loss of the future I'd imagined, the love I thought I'd found. The door opened behind me, and I whirled around, expecting confrontation. Instead, it was Valencia, her expression uncharacteristically solemn. "They sent you to talk me into staying?" I guessed, continuing to pack. "No," she replied quietly. "They don't know I'm here." Something in her tone made me pause. "Then why are you here?" Valencia closed the door carefully before approaching me. "Because I was like you once, confused, frightened by all this talk of covenants and bindings, except I had no choice. I was born into it." I studied her face, noticing for the first time the dark circles beneath her eyes, partially concealed by makeup. "What do they want from me, Valencia? Really?" She hesitated, glancing toward the door as if worried about being overheard. "The covenant requires blood sacrifice during each alignment. Traditionally, it's the newest member of the family who contributes." A cold weight settled in my stomach. "Contributes how exactly?" "It varies," she said vaguely. "Sometimes just blood, sometimes more. The entities have appetites that must be satisfied for the covenant to remain intact. This is crazy, I whispered, though a growing part of me was beginning to believe that the Tremaines, at least, thought it was real. Why are you telling me this? Because I don't want another person trapped in this family against their will. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small key. This opens the side gate near the kitchen gardens. There's a path through the woods that leads to the main road. If you hurry, you can be gone before they realize. I took the key, my fingers brushing against hers. Her skin was as cold as Calloway's had been. Why help me? Won't you face consequences? A bitter smile twisted her lips. I face consequences regardless. At least this way, someone escapes. Before I could respond, shouts echoed from somewhere in the house. Angry male voices raised in argument. Valencia's eyes widened. That's Calloway and Father. They must be arguing about you. Go now while they're distracted. I grabbed my hastily packed suitcase and followed Valencia through the servants' corridors she seemed to know intimately. The kitchen was empty, the staff mysteriously absent despite the early hour. Valencia led me to a small wooden door, partially hidden behind hanging copper pots. Once you're through the gate, follow the path until you reach the road. Don't look back, and whatever you hear, don't stop running. Her voice was urgent, her eyes constantly darting toward the kitchen entrance. Come with me, I offered impulsively. You don't have to stay either. She shook her head, a sad smile ghosting across her features. I can't. The binding is real, Ilara. Once it's complete, we physically cannot leave the family lands for long. But you're not bound yet. You can still escape. The implications of her words sent a chill through me, but there was no time to question further. The voices were growing louder, coming closer. I squeezed Valencia's cold hand once in gratitude, then slipped through the door into the crisp morning air. The side gate was exactly where she'd said it would be, hidden behind a trellis of climbing roses. The key turned smoothly in the lock, and I found myself on a narrow dirt path winding into dense woods. I ran, my city shoes unsuited for the terrain, but my fear providing all the motivation I needed to keep moving. I'd made it perhaps half a mile when the screaming began, a woman's voice, high and agonized, echoing through the trees. Valencia. I faltered, my conscience warring with my instinct for self-preservation. What were they doing to her? Should I go back? Could I help? Don't stop running, and whatever you hear, don't look back. Her words echoed in my memory, spurring me forward despite the continuing screams. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to buckle beneath me, the sounds eventually fading behind me. The path emerged onto a country road just as Valencia had promised. I stood there, gasping for breath, my suitcase suddenly feeling like it weighed a ton. There were no cars in sight, no houses visible, just miles of empty roads stretching in both directions. I pulled out my phone, unsurprised to find no signal. The Tremaine estate was notoriously remote, one of the features Calloway had extolled during our courtship, describing peaceful weekends away from the city's chaos. Now that isolation felt less like a retreat and more like a trap. With no other option, I began walking, choosing the direction I thought would lead back toward town. The sun climbed higher in the sky, beating down on my unsuitable clothing. The formal day dress I'd selected for the family breakfast, now constricting and uncomfortable for hiking. After what felt like hours but was likely less than one, I heard the rumble of an engine behind me. I turned, hope and fear mingling as a dusty pickup truck approached. It slowed as it neared, an elderly man with a weathered face leaning out the driver's window. "You all right, miss?" he asked, his eyes taking in my formal dress, disheveled appearance, and suitcase. "Car trouble?" "Something like that," I replied, unwilling to share the bizarre truth with a stranger. "I'm trying to get to town. Could you give me a lift?" He hesitated, suspicion briefly flashing across his features before compassion won out. "Hop in. I'm headed to Millfield." Millfield was the nearest town to the Tremaine estate, home to the quaint chapel where Calloway and I had exchanged our vows just yesterday. It seemed like a lifetime ago now. I climbed into the passenger seat, setting my suitcase at my feet. "Thank you," I said as he put the truck in gear. "I really appreciate the help." "Don't often see folk walking these roads," he commented, his tone casual but his eyes shrewd, "especially not dressed like you are." I scrambled for a plausible explanation. "I was visiting friends. We had a disagreement, and I decided to leave earlier than planned." "These friends wouldn't happen to be the Tremaines, would they?" he asked, his knuckles whitening slightly on the steering wheel. I stared at him, surprised. "You know them?" A humorless laugh escaped him. "Everybody around here knows the Tremaines. Been in these parts for generations." He glanced at me. "But outsiders don't usually leave their property on foot." Something in his tone made me hesitate to confirm his suspicion. "What do you know about them?" I asked instead. He was quiet for a long moment, the only sound the rumble of the old truck's engine and the crunch of gravel beneath its tires. "Strange family," he said finally. "Keep to themselves mostly. Come into town for supplies and such, but don't mix with locals. There are stories." "What kind of stories?" I pressed. Another long pause. "Nothing I'd repeat to a lady," he said finally. "Just superstitious nonsense, most likely. Old tales get twisted over time." We rode in silence for several minutes before curiosity overcame my caution. "My name is Alara Harlow," I said, deliberately using my maiden name. "I'm not from around here." "Tobias Fletcher," he replied with a nod. "Born and raised in Millfield, same as my father and his father before him." He hesitated, then added, "If you're mixed up with the Tremaines somehow, my advice is to keep going past Millfield. Don't stop until you're well away from these parts." "Why?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Some families cast long shadows," was all he would say. Tobias dropped me at the Millfield bus station, a small, dated building with a single ticket counter. Before driving away, he pressed a $20 bill into my hand despite my protests. "Get yourself as far away as you can," he advised, his eyes scanning the street as if expecting to see Tremaines emerging from the shadows. I purchased a ticket for the next bus to the city, scheduled to depart in 45 minutes. As I waited on the station's single bench, the events of the past 24 hours replayed in my mind. Had it really been just yesterday that I'd walked down the aisle toward Calloway, my heart full of hope for our future? How had everything unraveled so quickly? I pulled out my phone again, relieved to see I had signal now. There were 17 missed calls, 12 from Calloway's number and 5 from Mary Ann's. I ignored them, dialing instead the one person I knew I could count on. "Octavia Lambert speaking." My best friend's crisp voice answered on the third ring. "Tavia," I said, my voice breaking on her name, "I need help." To her credit, Octavia asked no questions, merely listening as I explained where I was and that I needed a place to stay. I'll be there, she promised. My cousin lives in Fernhaven. That's about 30 miles from Millfield. I'll call her, have her pick you up from the bus station there. Thank you, I whispered, tears threatening again. What happened, Alara? She asked gently. The wedding was beautiful. You and Calloway seem so happy. I'll explain everything when I see you, I promised, unwilling to get into the bizarre details over the phone. But Tavia, don't tell anyone where I am. Not my parents, not our friends, no one. Her silence spoke volumes about her concern, but she agreed. Call me when you reach Fernhaven. I'll make sure Daphne is there to meet you. True to Octavia's word, her cousin Daphne was waiting when my bus arrived in Fernhaven. A tall, no-nonsense woman with Octavia's same practical demeanor, she asked no questions as she drove me to her small apartment on the outskirts of town. The guest room is small but clean, she said as she showed me inside. Bathroom's down the hall. Octavia says you'll be heading to her place tomorrow? I nodded gratefully. Thank you for taking in a stranger. Daphne's expression softened slightly. Any friend of Octavia's is welcome here. There's soup on the stove if you're hungry. That night, in the safety of Daphne's spare room, I slept fitfully. My dreams were filled with strange moaning sounds and Valencia's screams echoing through dark woods. I woke repeatedly, each time relieved to find myself in the small, ordinary bedroom rather than the ornate blue room at the Tremaine estate. Morning brought a sense of unreality. Had I really fled my own marriage less than 48 hours after saying I do? Had my in-laws really been planning some kind of blood ritual involving me? It all seemed too outlandish in the light of day, like a plot from a Gothic novel rather than real life. My phone, which I'd turned back on to coordinate with Octavia, buzzed with a new text message. Calloway. Alara, please. Let me explain. What you heard wasn't what you think. Come home. I love you. Home. The word caught in my chest. The Tremaine estate had never been and would never be my home. I deleted the message without responding. Daphne drove me to the train station, again asking no questions, though her curious glances suggested she was burning with them. The 4-hour train ride to the city gave me time to think, to try to make sense of what had happened. Calloway and I had met at a gallery opening. I was there writing a piece for the culture section of the city newspaper where I worked. He was a patron of the artist. Our connection had been immediate and intense. Within weeks, we were inseparable. His family's wealth and status had intimidated me initially, but Calloway had seemed so normal, so down to earth, despite his privileged upbringing. There had been signs, I realized now. His reluctance to take me to the family estate until after we were engaged. The strange, almost ritualistic way he'd proposed, with specific words that he'd insisted had to be said precisely at sunset. The odd restrictions on our wedding, it had to be on that specific date, in that specific chapel, with certain traditional elements that couldn't be altered. I'd attributed it all to the eccentricities of old money, traditions and superstitions passed down through generations. Never had I imagined anything as sinister as what Valencia had described. Octavia was waiting at the train station, her familiar face a welcome sight after the nightmare of the past 2 days. She hugged me tightly, then held me at arm's length, examining me with concern. You look terrible, she announced in her characteristically blunt manner. Let's get you home. You can tell me everything over a very large glass of wine. Octavia's apartment was exactly as I remembered it, small but elegant, reflecting her minimalist taste and tidy nature. She settled me on her sofa, pressed a glass of red wine into my hand, and sat across from me in her favorite armchair. "All right," she said, her tone gentle despite her direct gaze. "What happened?" I told her everything. The separate rooms on our wedding night, the strange moans from Calloway's room, the blood on his collar, the bizarre breakfast conversation about portraits and bindings, and finally, Valencia's warnings and help with my escape. As I spoke, Octavia's expression shifted from concern to disbelief to horror. "Ilara," she said when I had finished, her voice carefully controlled, "do you realize what you're describing sounds like some kind of cult?" I nodded miserably. "I know it sounds crazy. I can hardly believe it myself. Have you considered that Valencia might have been, I don't know, mentally unwell, playing some kind of twisted game?" "You didn't see her face," I replied. "She was terrified. And those screams." I shuddered at the memory. Something terrible was happening to her when I left. Octavia set down her wine glass, her practical nature asserting itself. "First things first, we need to get you legal help. If what you're saying is true, you need an annulment, restraining orders, possibly police involvement." "The police?" I echoed. What would I even tell them? That my in-laws wanted to use me in some kind of blood sacrifice to renew a covenant with supernatural entities? They'd think I was the one who was mentally unwell. "We'll figure it out," Octavia promised. "For now, you're safe here. The building has security, and no one knows you're staying with me." Despite her assurances, I insisted on checking that all the windows were locked and the door was bolted before finally allowing myself to collapse into the guest bed. Exhaustion claimed me quickly, but my sleep was once again plagued by nightmares. Calloway's face transforming into something inhuman, Valencia's screams, the gold dress swallowing me whole. I woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains, momentarily disoriented before remembering where I was. The apartment was quiet. Octavia would already have left for her job at the investment firm where she worked as a financial analyst. She'd left a note on the kitchen counter next to a fresh pot of coffee. "Made an appointment with my lawyer friend for 3 p.m. She specializes in family law. Address and directions below. Call if you need anything. O." I poured myself coffee, grateful for Octavia's efficiency. As I sipped the strong brew, I mentally prepared for the conversation with the lawyer. How much should I reveal? How much would be believed? The supernatural elements of the Tremaine family's traditions would likely be dismissed as delusion or exaggeration, but perhaps the basic facts, coercion, threats, being held against my will, would be enough to secure an annulment. My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, unwilling to risk speaking to any of the Tremaines. A moment later, the notification for a new voicemail appeared. Against my better judgment, I listened. "Ilara, it's Valencia." Her voice was hushed, urgent. "I don't have much time. They know I helped you leave. Things are bad here, but that's not why I'm calling. You need to check the lining of your suitcase. The blue one you brought to the estate, there's something sewn into it, a protection charm my grandmother made. Keep it with you at all times. They're coming for you, Ilara. The binding wasn't completed, but the alignment is still coming. They need you back. Don't trust anyone. And whatever you do, don't come back here trying to help me. It's too late for that." The message ended abruptly, leaving me staring at my phone in horror. I rushed to the guest room where my suitcase lay open on the floor. The blue suitcase had been a wedding gift from Calloway. "For our honeymoon," he'd said, with that charming smile that now seemed sinister in retrospect. I examined the lining carefully, finding a small bulge near one corner. Using Octavia's sewing scissors, I carefully cut the stitches, revealing a small object wrapped in what appeared to be very old silk. I unwrapped it with trembling fingers to find a strange medallion, bronze, or perhaps copper, green with age, inscribed with symbols I didn't recognize. Valencia's protection charm seemed as outlandish as everything else about this situation, yet I found myself slipping the cord attached to it over my head, tucking the medallion beneath my shirt. If nothing else, it was a tangible reminder that at least one Tremaine had been on my side. The lawyer's office was in a sleek downtown high-rise, all glass and steel, a stark contrast to the Gothic atmosphere of the Tremaine estate. Lorraine Winters was a sharp-featured woman in her 50s, her salt and pepper hair cut in a precise bob that matched her no-nonsense demeanor. "Octavia has given me a broad outline of your situation," she said after introductions were complete. "I understand you're seeking an annulment of a very recent marriage under somewhat unusual circumstances." "That's putting it mildly," I replied, unsure how to proceed. "In my experience," she continued, fixing me with a penetrating stare, "it's best to start at the beginning and tell me everything. My job is not to judge, but to determine how best to protect your interests legally." So I told her, editing out the most outlandish elements while sticking to the core facts: the separate rooms, the strange behavior, the talk of bindings and covenants, the sense of being trapped, and Valencia helping me escape. I described the Tremaines as a controlling family with extreme religious or cultish beliefs that they'd hidden from me until after the marriage was official. Lorraine listened without interruption, taking occasional notes. When I finished, she sat back in her chair, studying me with those keen eyes. "From a legal perspective," she said finally, "we have grounds for annulment based on fraud. They concealed essential information that would have affected your decision to marry. The fact that the marriage wasn't consummated strengthens our case considerably." Relief washed through me. "So, you can help me?" "I can file the paperwork today," she confirmed. "However, there are other considerations. If this family is as controlling and potentially dangerous as you suggest, legal proceedings might escalate the situation. Are you concerned for your physical safety?" Valencia's voicemail echoed in my mind. "They're coming for you, Alara." "Yes," I admitted. "I believe they may try to find me." Lorraine's expression turned grave. "Then we should discuss protective measures, restraining orders, possibly a temporary relocation, security protocols." She hesitated, then added, "Have you considered going to the police?" I shook my head. "I have no proof of any actual crime, just weird family traditions and my own fears." "Sometimes fear is enough reason to seek protection," she countered, "but I understand your reluctance. Let's focus on the annulment first and proceed from there." By the time I left Lorraine's office, the annulment papers had been drafted and were ready to be filed first thing the next morning. She'd also provided me with resources for personal security and promised to expedite the proceedings as much as possible. I should have felt relieved, but as I made my way back to Octavia's apartment, a persistent sense of unease followed me. Every face in the crowded streets seemed to be watching me. Every shadow held potential threat. The medallion beneath my shirt felt warm against my skin, though whether from my own body heat or something else I couldn't say. Valencia's warning replayed in my mind. The alignment is still coming. According to Calloway, it was a celestial event that happened once every 33 years. What would the Tremaines do when that alignment arrived and I wasn't there for whatever ritual they had planned? Octavia was already home when I arrived, pacing her small living room with her phone pressed to her ear. She ended the call when she saw me, her expression troubled. "What's wrong?" I asked immediately. "That was Calloway," she said, watching my reaction carefully. "He called my office looking for you." Cold fear washed through me. How did he know to call you? "He said he was contacting all your friends, that you'd had some kind of breakdown after the wedding and needed help." She crossed her arms. "He sounded genuinely concerned, Alara. Said something about medication you'd stopped taking." "I'm not on any medication," I protested, anger flaring alongside my fear. "This is exactly what Valencia warned about. They're looking for me, and they're trying to make it seem like I'm the one who's unstable." Octavia's expression remained carefully neutral. "I didn't tell him anything," she assured me, "but he mentioned that your parents are worried too. Have you spoken to them?" My parents, practical, no-nonsense people who had been delighted when I announced my engagement to Calloway Tremaine, heir to one of the oldest fortunes in the country. They'd been somewhat reserved at the wedding, overwhelmed by the Tremaine family's old-world formality and the grandeur of the estate. "No," I admitted, "I should call them, but what do I even say? They were so happy about this marriage." "The truth," Octavia replied simply, "or as much of it as you think they can handle. They should at least know you're safe." My conversation with my parents that evening was difficult, to say the least. They alternated between concern, confusion, and barely concealed disappointment. Like Octavia, they suggested that perhaps I was overreacting to strange but harmless family traditions, that I was experiencing some sort of post-wedding anxiety. "Calloway called us, sweetheart," my mother said, her voice gentle but her disappointment evident. "He's frantic with worry, says you left without explanation after some kind of disagreement. Whatever happened, surely you can work it out. Marriage is about compromise." "This isn't about compromise," I insisted, frustration building. "There are things about the Tremaines, about their beliefs, that Calloway deliberately hid from me until after we were married." "What kinds of things?" my father asked, his practical nature seeking concrete details. How could I explain without sounding completely unhinged? "They have extreme religious beliefs," I said finally, "ritualistic practices that they expect me to participate in, things I cannot and will not be part of." A long silence followed before my mother spoke again. "Alara, dear, are you sure you're not misinterpreting things? The Tremaines are an old family with old traditions. Perhaps if you gave it time, tried to understand their perspective. They wanted to use me in some kind of blood ritual," I blurted out, immediately regretting my lack of restraint when another, longer silence followed. "I think," my father said finally, his voice carefully measured, "that you might benefit from talking to someone professional about these fears. Calloway mentioned that the wedding and the move to the estate might have triggered some anxiety issues." "I'm not anxious, and I'm not imagining things," I insisted, knowing even as I spoke that I was fighting a losing battle. The Tremaines' version, that I was unstable, that I'd had some kind of breakdown, was far more believable than the truth. The call ended with promises to stay in touch, but I could hear the concern in my parents' voices. Concern not about the Tremaines, but about my mental state. Calloway had gotten to them first, planting seeds of doubt that my story had only served to water. That went about as well as expected, I told Octavia, who had been pretending not to listen from the kitchen. They think I'm having some kind of breakdown. She joined me on the couch, offering a fresh glass of wine. Give them time. Once the annulment is filed, once there's an official legal action, it might lend credibility to your concerns. If we get that far, I said grimly, Valencia's warning still echoing in my mind, they're coming for you, Alara. You're safe here, Octavia reassured me, though I noticed she checked that the door was double locked before we went to bed. Sleep brought no respite from my fears. In my dreams, I wandered endless corridors in the Tremaine estate, each door opening to reveal the same scene, Valencia bound to an altar, blood streaming from countless small cuts while the Tremaine family stood around her, chanting that strange language I'd heard from Calloway's room. I woke gasping, sweat-soaked and disoriented. The room was dark, but something felt wrong. The air was heavy, charged somehow, like the atmosphere before a severe storm. I reached for the bedside lamp, but before my fingers found the switch, a shadow darker than the surrounding darkness moved at the foot of the bed. Hello, Ilara? Calloway's voice, but wrong somehow, deeper, resonating with harmonics that made my skin crawl. I scrambled backward, pressing myself against the headboard. How did you get in here? I demanded, my voice barely above a whisper. A low chuckle that didn't sound entirely human. Did you really think locks would keep me out? We're bound, you and I. The ceremony began the moment you said, I do. My fingers found the medallion at my throat, clutching it like a talisman. We're not bound by anything except a marriage certificate, which is being annulled as we speak. Is that what you believe? Another chuckle, this one edged with something that might have been pity. Oh, my naive bride. Legal documents mean nothing to powers like those we serve. We? I challenged. I serve nothing and no one, especially not whatever entities your family has deluded themselves into believing in. The shadow moved closer, resolving into Calloway's form as my eyes adjusted to the darkness. He looked different, gaunt, almost skeletal, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled. His eyes, though, his eyes were what truly frightened me. They seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, black holes in his pale face. The alignment is tomorrow night, he said, ignoring my defiance. With or without your cooperation, the covenant will be renewed, but it would be easier with your willing participation. I'm not going anywhere with you, I declared, trying to project confidence despite the terror clawing at my throat. Get out before I scream and wake the entire building. He smiled, a horrible, twisted expression that bore little resemblance to the charming smile that had first captured my heart. Valencia sends her regards, he said softly. She wanted me to tell you that your sacrifice won't be forgotten. What have you done to her? I demanded, cold dread settling in my stomach. Nothing she hasn't survived so far? His gaze dropped to the medallion I still clutched. Ah, I see she gave you Grandmother Adelaide's protection charm, touching but ultimately futile. It might keep me from taking you now, but it won't protect you forever. The blood calls to blood, Alara, and soon, very soon, you'll answer that call. Before I could respond, a sound from the hallway caught his attention. Octavia, moving about in the bathroom. Calloway's expression hardened. "We'll come for you tomorrow," he said, his voice once again layered with those inhuman harmonics. "When the alignment begins. Until then, enjoy your last day of freedom." He moved toward the window, which I was certain had been locked, and seemed to simply melt into the shadows there. One moment he was a solid, if terrifying presence. The next, he was gone as if he'd never been. I sat frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Had I dreamed the encounter? Was I truly losing my grip on reality? But no, the window was now unlocked and slightly ajar, the curtains stirring in the gentle night breeze. Calloway had been here, in Octavia's apartment, despite the building's security and locked doors. I didn't sleep again that night, sitting vigil with Octavia's largest kitchen knife beside me, jumping at every creak and settling sound in the old building. When morning finally came, I was exhausted but resolute. Whatever was happening, whatever the Tremaines believed or practiced, they were dangerous, and they were coming for me. Octavia found me still sitting rigidly on the bed, the knife clutched in white-knuckled hands. To her credit, she asked no questions, simply took the knife gently from my grip and replaced it with a cup of coffee. "Bad night?" she asked, surveying the dark circles beneath my eyes. "Calloway was here," I said, my voice hoarse from hours of silence. "In this room. Last night." To my surprise, Octavia didn't immediately dismiss my claim. Instead, she moved to the window, examining the lock with a frown. "You're sure? You weren't dreaming?" "I wish I was." I sipped the coffee, the bitter warmth helping to ground me in reality. "He said they're coming for me tonight. Something about an alignment." Octavia's practical nature took over. "Then we need to make sure you're not here. I have a cabin about 3 hours north. It's remote, hard to find, if you don't know where to look. We'll go there until this alignment has passed." "You believe me?" I asked, unable to keep the surprise from my voice. She sat beside me on the bed. "I don't know what to believe about blood rituals and supernatural covenants," she admitted. "But I know you. You're the most level-headed person I know. If you say Calloway was here, if you're afraid, that's enough for me." Tears pricked my eyes, the first I'd allowed myself since fleeing the Tremaine estate. "Thank you." We packed quickly, bringing only essentials. Octavia called in sick to work, something I'd never known her to do in all the years we'd been friends. As we loaded the car, I kept scanning the street, expecting to see Calloway or Frederick or even Marianne watching from the shadows. "Should we tell Lorraine where we're going?" I asked as Octavia navigated through morning traffic. She shook her head. "The fewer people who know, the better. I'll check my messages remotely, see if the annulment papers have been filed, but otherwise, we're going off the grid until this alignment thing is passed." The drive north was tense, both of us jumping at any vehicle that followed us for more than a few turns. The medallion Valencia had hidden in my suitcase hung heavy around my neck, a constant reminder of the danger we were fleeing. Octavia's cabin turned out to be a small but sturdy structure nestled in dense woods, accessible only by a winding dirt road that would have been easy to miss if you didn't know exactly where to turn. Inside, it was simple but comfortable. A main room with a stone fireplace, a tiny kitchen, one bedroom, and a surprisingly modern bathroom. "My grandfather built it," she explained as she lit the fireplace. My parents used it for hunting trips when I was young. I inherited it 5 years ago and fixed it up a bit. It's perfect, I said, meaning it. The isolation that might have been unnerving under other circumstances felt like safety now. We settled in, Octavia preparing a simple meal from the supplies we'd brought while I checked my phone. No signal, as expected in such a remote location. The lack of connection to the outside world was both reassuring and isolating. If the Tremaines somehow found us here, there would be no calling for help. As day faded into evening, my anxiety grew. If Calloway was to be believed, the alignment was tonight. What would happen when the Tremaines realized I wasn't where they expected to find me? Would they give up their search, or would their desperation only increase? "Tell me more about this alignment," Octavia said as we sat before the fire, mugs of tea warming our hands. What exactly did Calloway say would happen? I recounted both what Valencia had told me and what Calloway had said during his nighttime visit. According to them, it's a celestial event that happens once every 33 years. The Tremaine family uses it to renew some kind of covenant they believe gives them power and prosperity. And this renewal requires blood sacrifice, Octavia added, her expression troubled. Your blood. Originally, yes, but from what Calloway said last night, it sounds like they've used Valencia instead. Guilt gnawed at me. I left her there, Tavia. I heard her screaming, and I just kept running. Because she told you to, Octavia reminded me firmly. You couldn't have helped her by staying. They would have just had both of you. Logically, I knew she was right, but the image of Valencia's face, that sad smile as she'd handed me the key to the side gate, haunted me. Had she known even then what would happen to her in my absence? As night deepened, the forest around the cabin grew unnaturally quiet. No insects chirping, no night birds calling, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Just a heavy waiting silence that pressed against the windows like a physical presence. Is it always this quiet here at night? I asked, trying to keep the edge from my voice. Octavia shook her head slowly, her own unease evident in the tightness around her eyes. No, there's usually quite a symphony out there. We both startled at a sharp crack from the fireplace, just a log settling, but in the unnatural silence, it sounded like a gunshot. Octavia moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. There's no one out there, she reported, though she didn't sound entirely convinced. We're at least 20 miles from the nearest neighbor. Despite her reassurance, we double-checked all the locks and closed all the curtains. Octavia produced a baseball bat from a closet. Just in case, she said with a grim smile. We agreed to take watches through the night, neither of us willing to risk both being asleep if something happened. Octavia took the first shift while I tried to rest on the small sofa, the medallion clutched tightly in my hand. Sleep, when it came, was shallow and troubled. I dreamed of Valencia again, but this time she was different, pale as death, her eyes black like Calloway's had been, her voice echoing with those same inhuman harmonics as she whispered, "The blood calls to blood, Alara. You cannot escape it." I woke with a gasp to find Octavia shaking me gently. "Your turn to watch," she whispered. "It's just past midnight." "Anything happen?" I asked, scrubbing sleep from my eyes. She shook her head. "Quiet as a tomb out there. Too quiet." I took up position in the chair facing the cabin's single door, the baseball bat across my lap. Octavia stretched out on the sofa, though I doubted she'd sleep any more soundly than I had. The hours crept by with excruciating slowness. I watched the fire burn down to embers, not daring to add more wood for fear the sound might wake Octavia. Outside, the unnatural silence persisted, broken only occasionally by the soft moan of wind through the trees. Wait, not wind. I sat up straighter, straining my ears. There it was again, that same moaning sound I'd heard from Calloway's room on our wedding night. Inhuman, guttural, rising and falling in patterns that almost resembled speech. Octavia, I whispered urgently, wake up. Something's out there. She was instantly alert, years of camping and hunting trips having honed her response to potential danger. What did you hear? Moaning, like what I heard at the estate. My fingers tightened around the baseball bat. They've found us. Octavia moved to the window, carefully parting the curtain just enough to peer out. I don't see anyone, but she trailed off, her body going rigid. Ilara, look at the sky. I joined her at the window, following her gaze upward. The night sky, which should have been a canopy of stars, was wrong. The stars seemed to be moving, rearranging themselves into patterns that hurt my eyes to look at directly. And at the center of this impossible celestial dance, a darkness was forming, not just an absence of stars, but something actively negative, as if reality itself was being torn open. The alignment, I whispered, the medallion suddenly burning hot against my skin. It's happening. As if in response to my words, the moaning outside grew louder, closer. Shadows moved at the edge of the trees, human-shaped but wrong somehow, elongated and fluid in ways human bodies shouldn't be. We need to leave, Octavia said, her voice admirably steady despite the fear I could see in her eyes. Now. There's no time, I replied, watching as the shadows resolved into figures, moving toward the cabin, Calloway at the front, flanked by Frederick and Marianne. Behind them, more shapes, but these were definitely not human, their proportions all wrong, their movements jerky and uncoordinated. The back door, Octavia insisted, already moving in that direction. The car is hidden around the side, if we can reach it. Her words cut off in a scream as the back door burst inward, splinters flying. In the doorway stood Valencia, or what had once been Valencia. Her skin was waxy, her movements puppet-like, her eyes the same light-absorbing black as Calloway's had been. "Hello, sister," she said, in that layered voice that was and wasn't hers. "We've come to take you home." Octavia swung the baseball bat, connecting solidly with Valencia's midsection. Any normal person would have crumpled from such a blow, but Valencia merely staggered slightly, a grotesque smile spreading across her face. "The sacrifice has already begun," she said, advancing into the cabin. "But it is not complete. The covenant requires Tremaine blood freely given. Yours, Ilara." "I'm not a Tremaine," I protested, backing away as Octavia positioned herself between us. "You became a Tremaine the moment you said your vows," Valencia replied. "The name is bound to your soul now, just as our family is bound to the covenant." The front door burst open as well, Calloway and his parents entering in a synchronized movement that was too perfect to be natural. Behind them, those other shapes crowded in the doorway. Things I couldn't look at directly without feeling like my sanity was slipping. "The alignment is at its peak," Calloway announced, his voice barely recognizable. "The way is open. The old ones wait. Give us your blood, Ilara, and the covenant will be renewed for another generation." "Never," I spat, the medallion now so hot it was blistering my skin. Marianne's eyes fixed on the medallion. Adelaide's protection, she hissed. Of course, Valencia would have made sure you had it. She turned to her daughter, her expression contemptuous. Always the weak link in our family chain. Not weak, Valencia replied, her voice momentarily sounding more like her own. Just unwilling. There's a difference. Frederick moved forward with uncanny speed, seizing Octavia before she could swing the bat again. The friend is unnecessary, he said, his voice layered like the others. Dispose of her? No! I screamed as Frederick began dragging Octavia toward those unspeakable shapes in the doorway. Let her go. She has nothing to do with this. Then come willingly, Calloway offered, extending a hand toward me. Your blood for her life. A fair exchange. I looked at Octavia, my oldest friend, the only person who had believed me without question, who had risked her own safety to protect me. She shook her head frantically, still struggling against Frederick's inhuman strength. Don't do it, Elara, she gasped. Whatever this is, whatever they're planning, it's wrong. You know it's wrong. The medallion burned against my skin, and suddenly I understood what Valencia had been trying to tell me. It wasn't just protection, it was power. Adelaide Tremaine, Calloway's grandmother, had created it not to shield her descendants from the covenant, but to give them a choice, a way to fight back. I closed my hand around the medallion, embracing the pain as it seared my palm. I am Elara Harlow, I declared, my voice steady despite my fear. I reject the Tremaine name. I reject your covenant. I reject the blood sacrifice you demand. Something shifted in the air, a tension building like the moment before lightning strikes. The medallion grew hotter still, but I refused to release it, channeling my defiance, my rage, my determination not to be another victim of this family's madness. You cannot reject what has already been accepted, Marianne snarled, but there was uncertainty in her black eyes now. The vows were spoken. The binding has begun. The binding is incomplete, I countered, remembering Valencia's words. The marriage was never consummated. The blood was never willingly given. I am not yours to command. The medallion suddenly shattered in my grip, shards embedding themselves in my palm. Blood welled, my blood, freely shed, but not in service to their covenant. The pain was excruciating, but with it came clarity. Adelaide knew, I realized aloud. She knew the covenant could be broken. That's why she created this charm, not just to protect, but to provide a means of escape. The things in the doorway began to writhe and shift, their movements becoming more agitated. The unnatural darkness in the sky seemed to pulse in response, the tear in reality widening. Foolish girl, Frederick growled, his grip on Octavia tightening. You don't understand the forces you're dealing with. Without the covenant, our family is nothing. We will lose everything, wealth, influence, the very protections that have kept us safe for generations. Safe from what? I challenged. What terrible bargain did your ancestors make that requires blood sacrifice every 33 years? It was Valencia who answered, her voice now a blend of her own and something older, wiser. The first Tremaine sold more than he knew, not just his soul, but the souls of his descendants in perpetuity. The old ones grant power, prosperity, influence, but the price is blood and loyalty, renewed with each alignment. And if the covenant is broken, I asked, blood now dripping freely from my clenched fist, then the debt comes due. She replied simply, all of it, at once. Understanding dawned. You're not just here for me, I said, looking at each of the Tremaines in turn. You're here because you're afraid. If the covenant is broken, you lose everything, including your own souls. Calloway lunged toward me, his face contorted with rage and fear. Give us your blood, Alara. Renew the covenant. Save us all. But before he could reach me, the medallion shards in my palm began to glow with an internal light. My freely shed blood, not taken, not coerced, but given in defiance, was creating its own power, its own covenant. I think, I said slowly, raising my bleeding hand, that Adelaide left more than just protection. She left a way out for those brave enough to take it. I pressed my bloodied palm against Valencia's forehead, acting on instinct rather than knowledge. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Valencia gasped, her black eyes clearing, returning to their natural brown. Ilara, she whispered, sounding fully herself for the first time. What have you done? Broken one link in the chain, I replied, understanding blooming as I spoke. Adelaide's blood runs in your veins too. Her protection extends to all her descendants who seek it. Valencia's expression transformed, hope replacing despair, determination replacing resignation. She turned to face her family, standing beside me now rather than against me. It's over, she declared. The covenant is broken. I reject it, as Alara has rejected it. Impossible, Marianne hissed, though her certainty seemed to be wavering. The blood binds us all. None can escape. Adelaide did, I countered. She found a way to shield her true self from the covenant, to create this charm, to leave a path for those who would follow. How many generations of Tremaines have quietly rebelled, I wonder? How many have sought escape from this terrible bargain? The unnatural darkness in the sky began to contract, the tear in reality slowly closing. The entities in the doorway grew more frenzied, their movements desperate now rather than threatening. Frederick released Octavia suddenly, his attention fixed on the retreating darkness. No! He shouted, his voice thick with panic. The alignment is ending. The way is closing. Good, Valencia said firmly. Let it close. Calloway stood frozen, watching as the supernatural manifestations of the covenant began to fade. The black had receded from his eyes, leaving them their natural gray, confused, frightened, but human. What happens to us? He asked, his voice his own again. If the covenant is truly broken, I don't know, Valencia admitted, but whatever comes, it must be better than generations of blood sacrifice and subjugation. As the last of the unnatural darkness faded from the sky, as the stars returned to their proper places, the Tremaines seemed to deflate. The uncanny power that had animated them dissipating like morning mist. They stood before us now as merely human, confused, frightened humans facing the collapse of everything they had believed in. You've doomed us all, Marianne whispered, though the accusation lacked conviction. She looked suddenly older, frail almost, the aristocratic bearing that had so intimidated me, now nothing more than an empty shell. No, I replied, still cradling my bleeding hand. I've freed you, all of you. Whatever consequences come, you face them as humans, not as slaves to some ancient, terrible bargain. Frederick sagged against the wall, his imposing frame suddenly diminished. For generations, we've been taught that the covenant was our strength, our birthright, our blessing. To be free of it, I don't know how to live without it. You'll learn, Valencia told him, compassion in her voice despite everything. We all will. Calloway approached me cautiously, his eyes fixed on my bloody hand. "Ilara," he began, but seemed unable to find words to continue. "Don't," I said quietly. "There's nothing you can say that will undo what's been done. The marriage will be annulled. You and your family will have to find a new way forward. Without me, without the covenant, without the power you've relied on for generations." "But the debt," he protested weakly. "If the covenant is broken, the debt comes due. Our souls—" "Your souls were never yours to pledge," I interrupted. "Your ancestors made a bargain they had no right to make, binding generations unborn to a terrible fate. Whatever comes now, whatever the cost of freedom, at least it will be paid by those who actually incurred the debt, not innocent descendants." As the sun began to rise, painting the forest with golden light, the last vestiges of the supernatural fled. The Tremaines stood in the broken doorway of Octavia's cabin like lost children, unsure what to do next. In that moment, I almost pitied them. 4 people who had built their entire identity around a dark covenant, now forced to confront a world without its protection. "Go," I told them simply. "Go home. Face whatever comes next with the same courage Valencia showed when she helped me escape." They left without protest, a family diminished but perhaps in time reborn. Valencia was the last to go, pausing at the threshold to meet my eyes. "Thank you," she said softly, "not just for breaking the covenant, but for showing me it was possible to defy it. I've lived in fear my entire life, never believing escape was an option." "Adelaide believed," I replied. "She left the tools for those who would follow her path. You found them. You recognized their importance. You made sure I had the medallion when I needed it most." A smile ghosted across her lips, sad but genuine. "I'll contact you when things settle. Whatever happens next with our family, I suspect we'll need help navigating it." After they were gone, Octavia helped me bandage my hand, the cuts from the medallion shards already beginning to close in a way that didn't seem entirely natural. "So," she said, as we surveyed the damaged cabin, "that happened." I laughed despite everything, a slightly hysterical sound, but genuine. "Yes, that happened. What now?" I looked out the window at the morning light filtering through the trees, at the ordinary sky where just hours before reality had torn open to reveal something beyond comprehension. The future stretched before me, uncertain but my own, free from the Tremaine family's dark legacy. "Now," I said, "we go back to the city. I finalize the annulment. I rebuild my life, one day at a time, on my own terms. And the Tremaines?" I thought about Valencia's parting words, about the family facing the consequences of broken covenants and centuries of dark bargains. "I think their story is just beginning," I said finally, "but it's no longer my story." As we packed to leave, I picked up the fragments of Adelaide's medallion, carefully wrapping them in a handkerchief. Perhaps someday they would be needed again, or perhaps they were now just metal and memory. Either way, they were a reminder that even the oldest chains can be broken, that freedom is possible even when escape seems impossible. On our wedding night, my husband had claimed exhaustion, sending me to sleep alone while strange moans echoed through the Tremaine ancestral home. Those sounds had been my first warning, the first hint that the family I'd married into was bound by darker covenants than I could have imagined. But in the end, it wasn't the supernatural that had saved me, but human courage, Valencia's, Adelaide's, my own. The truth about the Tremaines, about their generations long pact with entities beyond human understanding, had nearly claimed me as its latest sacrifice. Instead, it had set me free, breaking chains I hadn't even known were being forged around me. Whatever came next, I would face it with clear eyes and an unburdened soul, grateful for the narrow escape from a family whose traditions had hidden horrors beyond imagination,